Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at My Expat Taxes. For my fellow Americans out there, we all know tax season is upon us, and for anyone who's ever had the pleasure of dealing with multiple tax agencies in multiple countries, you know this can be a challenging experience. That's why when it comes to dealing with anything tax-related abroad, I always recommend hiring a pro to help you navigate this unknown space. In my experience, this not only saves you time and spares you from the unnecessary headaches, it also has literally saved me thousands of dollars in taxes over the years. So I am super excited to introduce you to My Expat Taxes, a true pro in this space that focuses 100% on U.S. expat taxes. Whether you're filing for 2023, catching up on back taxes, predicting a future tax obligation for a future move abroad, or just looking for some guidance, My Expat Taxes has your back with speedy and affordable online filing options and real human accountants to assist you as needed. Join the more than 16,000 other Americans living abroad who have used their services by visiting myexpattaxes.com via the link in the show notes. My guest today is Q Hamirani, who many of you probably recognize as the creator of Airbnb's digital nomad program, which eventually became what we know today as the Live and Work Anywhere program. Certainly set the bar high for any company out there that wants to allow its employees to embrace remote work, location independence, and continue traveling and working and living abroad while still maintaining their career back home. But today we wanted to dive into Q's personal life and learn about how he made the transition from growing up in India to eventually living where he is today in the Bay Area, and in the meantime, leveraging corporate nomadism to travel around the world. Q has a passion for international culture and languages that goes far beyond just talking about digital nomad policies. So we'll get into all of that today. I was really thankful for his time and enjoyed this conversation. I think you all will as well. Please help me in welcoming Q to About Abroad. You know what I think is funny is that everyone knows you for like one specific thing. You're a man of many talents. You've done many things, and you've been around the world. I happen to know that, but everybody knows you as the Airbnb policy guy. Do you recognize that?
I mean, it is, it's the Live and Work Anywhere program did amplify pretty quick, and it did give me a stage. So yeah, it definitely was a stage that I'm thankful to be on as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an unbelievable thing. And the easy thing for us to do here would be to dive right into that, because I'm pretty sure we could fill our entire slot here today just diving deep on this. But I'm super curious, like when I get someone like yourself that's, willing to share their time and share their story with us, I want to try to take a step back from like that main narrative that everyone knows you for. And we'll get there. Like I want to talk about that a little bit, but I would love to kind of circle back to like who you are, where you're from, because the show here is about abroad, and you're someone that has a lot of international experience. You've spent a lot of time living away from your home country and traveling the world in a variety of different ways. So I happen to know like a little bit about this, but just the bullet points, and we can fill in the blanks for me. But I imagine there's a lot of people in the audience who are thinking like, oh yeah, I know all about the work that this guy's done, but I'd love to know him on more of a personal level. So I'm going to leave it like very broadly open to you, and just kind of like would love to hear a little bit about where you come from, and then kind of like fast forwarding to where you are today.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's refreshing for me as well. So that's a good perspective, because I think a lot of the work we do is inspired by who we are, and the who we are is kind of under the wrap sometimes, right? But it influences everything we do. So I'll start off with when I was a kid, when I was 14 years old. In high school, I grew up in Mumbai, or Bombay as it was called in India. When I was 14 years old, I went to a boarding school, which was in the southern part of India. So it was probably like a 3-hour flight and a 5-hour drive up this mountain. And there was like this American boarding school, which was 100 years old, that had been there for a while. But the point here is, I left home when I was 14 to go to a boarding school. And it was really cool because the boarding school was an international boarding school. So, for example, when I got there, my one roommate was Korean and one roommate was Japanese. And I'd never interacted with folks who were non Indian before. So it was really cool in terms of just really experiencing that people can look different, they can have different perspectives, but there's also commonality in humanity, right? Like you may have different views on something, but there is an underpinning. For example, if you believe most people have good intent, they know, that's my belief, and most do till they prove you otherwise. So, there is commonality. So that was my boarding school experience in high school. Once I graduated from high school, I came all the way from Mumbai to a small town about 2 hours south of Chicago called Urbana-Champaign. And I went to the University of Urbana-Champaign there, and I studied electrical engineering, which was a great program and a fun way to do it. But the fun fact here on location and how I kind of went from one end of the world to another, I did not even know where Urbana-Champaign was on the map. I didn't even know where, like in the US. I had applied to 4 or 5 colleges and for engineering because that was my passion. And it just so happened that Urbana-Champaign was in the top 3 electrical engineering programs. And because it was a state school, it was also relatively more affordable between scholarships and all that. So like I came here, when I was 17 for college, and I show up in Urbana-Champaign. I have no idea like what I'm in for. I didn't even know how to like do basic things like use a washer dryer because we didn't have that in India. So, like how to use coins, how do you do washer dryer? And then, it was a different level of being away from home, right? Being in a boarding school, at least I would come back twice a semester. It was still in reach for example, for my family to come visit or vice versa. But now it's pretty far off. And Urbana-Champaign, for folks that don't know, it's a small college town, but it's the Midwest of the US, which is farming is basically the key kind of industry there. So all I remember is like the second day, third day I was there, you wake up in the morning and all you smell is fertilizer, right? Which is not a pleasant smell. So I was like, where did I end up? But that's life, right? Like I don't have any regrets, but it was a great experience in typical fashion of me wanting to continue to learn about different perspectives, different people, different cultures, experience that. In my junior year, I decided that I wanted to study abroad. I just wanted to go somewhere and experience a different country, experience a different culture. And funny story there was, so I applied for 2 study abroad programs. One was in Japan and one was in Germany. And the reason I did that was I always, still today, too, have a passion for automobiles and cars. And both Japan and Germany were like the 2 places where, good car, the automobile industry is pretty big and has been. I ended up going to Germany only because German cars are German cars, but I've also, and this is threaded to me till today. I'm a big fan of electronic music and house music, and Germany has a big electronic. In fact, when I was there, this is 2001. I actually went to the Berlin Love Parade as well, and I think a few years after that, the Berlin Love Parade is no longer. So, anyways, I went to Germany. I stayed with a host family. So this is a kid that's come from India to the US, gone back to Germany, started learning the language, started really immersing myself in how can I actually learn about different things. Came back later back to Urbana-Champaign, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to minor in German in addition to engineering as well, so I can continue to kind of like that culture that I had built from living with a host family, from experiencing Europe from a different lens. When you live in Europe, as you know, like the world is your oyster. When you live in the US is your oyster. But it's very different because it's pretty homogenous relatively, right? In the US relative to Europe, where one weekend you could just drive to a different country and come back. So that was great. Studied German, studied engineering. And then when I graduated, it was, again, these are all life point decisions, right? That were fueled by my passion to basically experience new places and cultures and travel as much as I could. Because, I think that is what promotes growth for someone like myself. When I graduated, I kind of had 2 options, right? One was I had a job offer from General Electric in their manufacturing leadership program. And it was a great job, but it was in manufacturing facilities which were in very small towns in the US, maybe 2 or 3 hours from a big city. And the other option I ended up getting was go into consulting, which was I ended up with Deloitte. I'd applied to a few companies. But the point here I'm trying to make is the role of a consultant when I graduated from college was, look, you're going to live out of a suitcase. You're going to travel everywhere as wherever we need you to on a dime. And guess what? We'll pay for the flights and the hotel, and you get to keep your points and your miles. And I was like, this is a no brainer, right? Like, I want to go around the world. I want to experience work cultures, but also personal cultures. And someone's going to pay for this. Like, this is the no brainer. So, the theme here is continuing to wanting to experience cultures and places. So I did that for 5 years with Deloitte. One of some of the best times of my life where I was on a plane every single Monday for 5 years. And I got to experience quite a few places, and one in particular where I spent I would say, almost a year in total between two jobs back to back was Mexico City. I was there in Mexico City. The culture is very interesting in the fact that it's got a lot of similarities between the Indian culture in terms of gathering in groups and wanting to really like be social, and very very different. And the funny fact there was, every time I was there for almost a year. Every time I was there, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but it was reality. Every time I was there in Mexico, like, folks would think that I am from some South American country because of my color. Like, they knew I was not Mexican for the most part, but they didn't know, like, if you're another South American country. But the minute I would open my mouth, it was pretty clear that I was neither. So then I started picking up Spanish, because once you're there, it's easier to pick up. And I had done actually 2 years of Spanish in high school in the boarding school that I'd gone. I'd done Spanish and then I went to German. So at the end of that year, like, I basically was like, I was doing presentations at work in Spanglish. I was never good enough in Spanish, but I could, get that going. That was really cool in terms of that experience. And then I'm only threading my work experience because that's where the locations and my experiences, and these were cognizant decisions on jobs to get the experiences abroad. After I finished about 5 years at Deloitte, I got this cool job offer at Aon, which was based in Chicago. I was in Chicago this whole time. I moved to the Bay Area around 6, 7 years ago. But the reason I took the job at Aon was fascinating to me, at least, and I hope it'll help with my thinking and experiences. The role at Aon was, North America was our headquarters. I had to physically be responsible for 9 countries in Europe and Brazil and Mexico. And rather than just traveling every week with Deloitte, which was not as international relatively, Aon was going to be every other week, but I had to be in these countries physically. Right. So to me, it was like, I'd never been to Brazil before. This is like amazing. I'd been to a couple of those 9 countries, but I'd not been to the Nordics. I'd not been to, a few countries on that list. So I took that job because I was like, I'm going to be able to now experience, and this is what I refer to it in my like post-pandemic era context. This was corporate nomadism, right? It was not, because someone was paying, there was business sponsored trip, visas were a lot easier. Like, you didn't need a nomad visa if a company is sending you. So this was corporate nomadism at its finest, right? So I spent almost 2 years traveling across Europe, in 9 countries. There were a couple weeks where I would be, for example, in Stockholm one day, Hamburg another day, and I had to figure out how to be in Sao Paulo and Mexico City on my way back, right? And it was fascinating because just every flight you take as well, right? From a Scandinavian airline flight there to a Brazilian Airlines flight to Brazil, it's just the cultures. Everything is so different, right? It was constantly context switching. So for me, it's always been, because of maybe the boarding school aspect as well, and just wanting to experience the globe. I mean, we're lucky, and I think all of us today, especially in the last, I'm talking over 2 decades ago when I started this journey, like, we live in a very, very globalized world, right? It's very easy today to communicate, to build relationships. Like, I know we're going to be meeting in Lisbon pretty soon. Like, that's around the world from SF, right? Where I'm based. So I always love taking advantage of that. So that's been a lot of my, journey. Since then, I slowed down the travel a little bit, but all the jobs I've had, Airbnb, JLL, wherever I've been, they've all been very intentional global roles, which have needed me to set up a team in Asia, set up a team in Europe. And the joy of that for me is going there, and in a startup scrappy environment, it's, you don't have a team. Like, you are the team. You go there, do the work for a bit, then hire someone. So it really embeds you in, not just work, but like, what do you do after work too, right? It's the cultures. Like, I remember one of my favorites still today, if I'm in Germany, which I was in December, even for one night, I just go and grab a doner kebab. Like, that was my memory of after school every day, going, getting, and they taste so freaking good, right? So there are each, you pick up things from each place, and then collectively, I think that would, to me, is like the sense of community, and then the sense of really appreciating that differences are good. It's good to talk through different perspectives. It's also taught me so many things, I would say, one of which is just in the work environment of, how can you disagree and commit, right? Like, everyone does not have to see things the same way. And in fact, if you do, it's kind of not as stimulating, right? Like, I say in my team, for example, if we're all just agreeing with, for example, one idea I have, it's kind of, we're not challenging ourselves. It's got that deep underlying, area of experiencing places. Why did I go to Airbnb? Because that's the mission of Airbnb, connecting people, right? When the pandemic happened, it was experiences that we had went virtual. So it's always been, it's easy to look back in life, right, and say, oh, I perfectly threaded all these things because that's what I like. That's not what happened. But I think the underlying theme of wanting to just sit on a plane and go somewhere and experience the culture, wanting to live that, is easier said now in hindsight as I reflect on it. But that's been me. I mean, I think I'm at heart like part, the community that has built me in terms of perspectives that have shaped me. And I just love being around people and love doing things that really, really connect the globalized world. So, the Airbnb program, just as an example, is one example of something I put myself through a lot of pain to figure out. For, before that program came to light, it was 15 months of incubation in a very, very stressful environment. And why did I do that, right? Forget the program. I think everyone knows the program and you can look it up, and, that's cool and that's great. But the reason I killed myself to do it was because we were 3-4 months into the pandemic, and people wanted to go around the world, not to travel. They wanted to go be with loved ones. They wanted to take care of people and their own kind of societal sanity, because cities were literally locked down, and there were folks stuck. And why did I do that? Because it was like, there are complexities from a compliance perspective. So the easy answer would have been, you just can't do it, right? Like, it's too tough. And we had not even gone IPO at this point. We were trying to go IPO. So all eyes on us, compliance lens on us. The easy answer could have been like, we're not going to allow it. And if people do it, we said they couldn't do it. So, like, we're cool, right? Like, because it's not on us. But the hard answer, which was what I pushed for, and obviously this has to be in the right environment, right? So this was Airbnb's DNA. Like, you always challenge the status quo. So you have to be in the right environment to do things as well. I want to recognize that. But it was like, okay, it's complex. So what? Let's figure it out, because at the end of the day, people need to experience, if people want to experience different places. I know I've gone through it personally. We should be killing ourselves to do that, because the world is just a better place the more connections that are threaded through. I Even on that program, like, I went for a month. I took my son as well, who was barely a year at that time, and I traveled with my wife and my son across 3 cities in India, and I went back to kind of my roots that I had not gone to for a long time. So, and I was able to work for that month, right? So it's, anyway.
Let me ask you, actually, so real quick on that, just in case somebody's listening and they're not familiar with the program, give us a quick little synopsis of the Airbnb program that you're talking about.
Yeah, the quick TLDR is, the program is called Live and Work Anywhere. And the program had 4 dimensions. One was, you can come into the office or you can work from home. It's completely your choice. There's no mandates. It's, each person has a different scenario. So do what's best for you. The second one was what became that incubated program I talked about for 15 months, and our differentiator, which is, you can live and work anywhere around the world for up to 90 days. But we help do the assessment. We help make sure you are doing it in a thoughtful manner, both for the company as well as for yourself, because there's liability on both sides that you would undertake sometimes. The third one was, we moved from location-based pay to value-based pay within a country. So, within the US, for example, it's very common to have tiers of pay based on if you're in San Francisco, if you're in Texas, there's tiers. We took all that out. We said, so for example, Q, if you want to move from San Francisco to Texas, your pay doesn't change because it's the value we're going to monitor. So we moved to value-based pay. And the fourth one was, which is very, very important in a remote distributed world that we were embarking on, which is if you are, we have to be very intentional, and we will have in-person gatherings in a coordinated way so that we make sure we continue to thread those relationships, the synergy, the culture, because people can be productive in a remote environment. We actually we were remote for 2 years when the pandemic hit straight. We turned around the company, went public. You can be, so all the perceptions from leaders on, oh, remote work doesn't work, we just had proof. So that was out the door. But we recognize that to strengthen relationships and to really be in that mode of building those, in person is needed. So the fourth point was, we will meet in person, but it'll be coordinated and curated a couple of times a year. It's not going to be you have to come in 3 days a week. So that was the overall program. And the pain I went through, as I mentioned, for 15 months before, was just driven from my passion of wanting people to explore the world, just like I did in some ways as well.
I think it's fascinating because a lot of detractors of like the whole remote work movement will say they'll lean into that aspect that, oh, you lose the personal connection, you lose the ability to create long lasting relationships, friends, trust, all of these things that are very important, like bottom line important factors in any business. And especially when you're talking about at the scale of something like Airbnb or some of the other organizations you've worked at, this is an absolutely essential thing that you have to develop. But people like yourself, people like myself, we believe very much so that you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can have remote distributed work. People can have that freedom to choose where they want to call home. You can have value-based pay, and at the same time curate really intentional, well done in-person time that kind of ties the whole thing together. The way I look at it, like at Doist, for example, is we have 50 weeks a year. You get to work from wherever you want. And 2 weeks per year, we bring you together for some really incredible time together in person. And that balance is perfect for us. Like, I've surveyed the team and asked them, what do you want? Do you want more of these? And everybody, two to three is like the right amount. The rest of the time they get to live and work and thrive wherever it is that they choose. And it can work, but it does take a level of intentionality, and someone like yourself curating this over, like you said, like a 15-month incubation stage is incredible.
Yeah, and I think, for me, it's always like going back to first principles, right? Like what are we trying to solve? And, even taking the work out of the equation. For me, like when I was reflecting on it, is, the way I stay in touch with my own close friends and family is mostly remotely, right? Like, since I've left home and kind of been on this side. But even now, even let's just, even I'll exaggerate an example. Even close friends in the Bay Area, right? Like, that live around me, most of the time we're talking on WhatsApp, we're talking on text message, and then we try to meet once a month. We try to meet at some point in person, because you recharge that barometer of relationships and socializing and energy more than anything. And then we all have our lives with kids and whatnot that we are continuing to communicate remotely. Like, this is no different, right? Like, humans want to be together, they want to be connected. If I can have deep personal relationships with my family, with my close friends, in a remote world, and some friends, like, because I went to boarding school and folks are around the world, I meet like once in 6 years. Like, if I happen to be in a country in Singapore and I have friends there, I'd meet them, but we still have not lost that touch. This is no different, right? Just because an employer feels you need to come, it's very different. So I think you hit it on, is the intentionality is we, in a lot of ways, our profession now has turned into event curators.
Yeah. Yeah. I spend 20% of my time is on event curation. Like, mathematically, that's how much time I'm spending on building offsites and planning retreats and things like that. I mean, we invest a ton in it, from like a revenue standpoint, a percentage of our revenue, and also time and energy, because we believe it's kind of like the glue maybe that holds it all together. But the whole thing, it's a core part of who we are as a distributed company. And I think there's something really cool about that. Like, the in-person aspect matters. We say remote first, not remote only. And that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's unfortunate that it's a common misconception that if you're a remote work advocate, you never want to meet in person. It's pretty much, it's actually the opposite. You do want to meet in person and you crave that so much when those right moments come because, so it's unfortunate sometimes when you see those, you see those misconceptions. But that's why you and me and the rest of the community, the remote work community, are trying to share our own experiences because there's plenty to gain from it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's hilarious listening to your story about the personal side of your life. Like I saw how much, it's using the word intentionality again, how much intentionality you put into the community and travel aspect of your career decisions, your life decisions. Like as you were talking about them, you were bouncing back and forth between like, yeah, this was an important career step, but it also gave me the chance to travel and connect with people around the world. And that was really important to me. And like, people can't see your face. They're listening to this on podcast. I can see your face and I see you like light up when you talk about that aspect of travel. Like, it wasn't seeing the tallest skyscraper in the world. It was like, yeah, I was there in that place, connecting with those people, building community. And it happened to be in a foreign corner of the world. And that lights me up. And I thought that was a really cool aspect of your personal story.
Yeah, thanks. And I think one of my beliefs is like every human has that spark of, when they experience a new culture. Some may be more introverted than others and may not want to travel, or some may not have the circumstances to get a job to do that, or in whatever scenario. But at the end of the day, like my personal belief, and I could be wrong, right? Because this is just my own personal belief, is humans want to connect. They want to connect with each other. And even in a world today of AI and Gen AI and all that, which is amazing in terms of technology evolution, I think that only means that human connections are going to be even more important, right? Because we're not all going to be like Wally, just like be with our Vision Pros or Oculuses and never talk to each other. I think that's going to even more crave the need to meet. So I don't think it's going away, because humans, as by nature, I think we're herd mentality, right? Like we want to meet. I keep remembering in boarding school, and I still say this even in job interviews. I was like, I love the reason I picked the people profession, because I was an electrical engineer that did not work in HR for the first decade of my career. It was finance, strategy, and ops. The reason I picked it was just because of the fact that I wanted to try and just empower people and make them be their best, no matter where they are. Right. So like a lot of commonality comes through when you think about it. And that's who we all are. Like we want to be together. Like when I was in boarding school, and even now, I say like I want to cause commotion or I want to be productive, but I don't want to do it alone. I want to be with people because like you just learn so much, you grow so much. And for me, it's just personally fun. And it doesn't mean like I'm 100% extrovert just because I want to do this. I would say like I'm introvert, extrovert. It depends on where I am, what I'm doing, obviously sometimes more than others. So it does not have to mean like you have to be a solid extrovert to want to be around people. But I think we all learn and grow. And so deep inside, I feel like every human, even if they did not feel like they wanted to experience a different culture, once they experience it, it definitely provides a new perspective that opens your eyes to things you may not like too. It's not like it's always things you like, right? Like you may be somewhere and you're like, oh, like I don't like this part of it, but but others do, and that's life, right? In that context.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you in partnership with my friends over at Lamont & Co. If you're planning a retreat, offsite, or group gathering of any kind this year, I highly suggest tapping into their extensive knowledge and experience to help you find the best possible venue for your event. I work with Kim, who has become my trusted advisor when it comes to planning any event around the world, and she's literally saved me hundreds of hours of work and has located venues I never would have found on my own. She even provides me with budget breakdowns and cost estimates for each location I'm interested in and negotiates contract terms on my behalf, all for free. If it sounds too good to be true, I thought the exact same thing at first, but I can assure you this is the real deal. Lamont is paid by the venues, not by you, so there's no cost, risk, or obligation here. So do yourself a favor and contact Lamont via the link in the show notes when you're planning your next group, retreat, offsite, or gathering. Before we dive back into the rest of the interview, I have a small favor to ask of the audience. If you are enjoying this episode and getting some value out of it, then please follow these very simple instructions. Step 1, pick up your phone. I'll give you a second. Step 2, leave a 5-star review for About Abroad. That's it. That's all I'm asking. It takes about 2 seconds. Of course, it is completely free to you, and it is the best possible way to support myself, the show, and everyone working on About Abroad behind the scenes. The funny thing is that there are thousands of people tuning in to this show every single week, but we are very likely to only get a few reviews by industry standards, and reviews are the most impactful way that you can show support for the show. So if you have the time, please do so. And either way, I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Have you, I have a feeling the answer is yes, but have you read The Culture Map?
I have a while ago. I haven't read it recently though. It came out it's been around for a while, right?
It's been around for a while. And I mean, the gist of it is sort of what we're touching on here, and something like directly that you mentioned earlier, which I can totally see drives both of us. And I think it's a cool common denominator.
I don't remember it enough to catch that. So maybe give us a quick TLDR. Yeah.
Yeah, so the like very short version is that basically it analyzes people from different cultures and how we look at problem solving, we look at things like feedback, constructive criticism, how we work together, and why that is. And so like an example is, at the time that I read it, the person I was reporting to was Danish, and they did a lot of Danish examples in the book, and they would say, this is how a Danish person would generally handle this situation, let's say constructive criticism or like hierarchy in an organization, and this is how an American would do it, or a British person. They go much deeper on these like spectrums, so it's not just about like the country that you're from, it's more about like where you fall on these different spectrums. But it's super fascinating because as I'm reading it, I mean, I work on a team with people from 35 countries around the world, and I'm like, oh, that's why that person does it this way, and that's why I handled that issue this way. But that kind of thing like lights me up, like I'm kind of a nerd for the differences between cultures and like where people come from and why you handle something a certain way. And I think a big part of that is because it's challenged me. It challenges me to think through things in a different way, and that challenge is part of the fun of life. And so it's where the source of that challenge comes from. It happens to be the intercultural differences. And at one point in my career, like I left a job that I really, really loved, but it was simply because like I needed to interact with more people from more parts of the world. Like that, the intentionality for me was like, I need to be surrounded by people that look and sound and you have to approach things from a different way. And so that was always like very important to me. And I didn't realize it until, 5-6 years into my career. But once I made that shift, it's been so stimulating. And like on a daily basis, I think through these things, like this is what I get to do. And this is how I'm challenged every day. And I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's spot on. I mean, I think I still remember when I first started that job, which was taking me down to Brazil. I was on a call with the folks in Brazil from Chicago, and we were trying to like work through some project or whatnot. And there were like no questions, right? And I was just like, when I get no questions, I'm like, obviously either folks are confused or they're disengaged or there's something here, because people always are curious, right? In some form or the other. They don't have to agree, but they can be curious and ask. So I ended up I remember telling my boss at that time, something doesn't feel right. I'm just going to fly down there tomorrow. So I took a night flight, went there, and I spent 2 days there. And I can't tell you the amount of conversation that we had. And it was cultural, right? Someone in HQ is on a call. It's pretty hierarchical. Like, let's not ask or let's not, push it. But then, so it's very different where now I guess I've built my own culture map in some ways, and I'm still building it because I've not experienced all cultures. There's so much more to experience in life. But like if I go to Europe versus if I'm in the US versus if I'm in LATAM or Asia, like there's very different ways to even approaching things because cultures demand very different, be it hierarchical, be it directness and openness in the US versus being very polite and kind in UK at least and some parts of Europe. So it's crazy because we're all creating our own culture map by the day. And how do you create it? You in my view, you only create it by experiencing them, right? I still tell folks, I never worked in engineering even for a day, even though I did that as a program. But I still say till today that I still think I'm an engineer every day. The only difference is I'm trying to solve human mind problems, which has no constant variables when you overlay emotions and all that. So it's a constant puzzle. I'm trying my, racking my brain on trying to figure out, why did someone act like this, even though it was not what I expected, right? And getting into their shoes. And 9 out of 10 times, it's either I didn't understand where they were coming from, either there was a lot more going on in their head, like either personal or other things that I was not aware. But it all boils down to, there is so much more to every single person you're talking to. And there's no way you will ever know it until you peel into it or give them the space to mention it. So all this would not have come, right, if you were not a globalized world and would travel and hop. I think one of the things I didn't mention that is important, like that is very relevant to this as well. I did mention my passion for electronic music, but one of the things that did for me, and I've not done this in a decade now, but I used to do it every year, was I would basically travel around the world for music festivals. And these would range from the mountains of Quebec in Canada, and I would meet people from around the world that would go there. Or for example, another one was into the Sahara Desert in Morocco, where you would drive for 2 days into the desert, and there would be like 1,500 people from around the world that would basically collect and have 4 days of living together, pitching your own tent, enjoying music. And some of the conversations that it's so wild in terms of like meeting people. So I think once you start, it's addictive. Once you start experiencing, there's no limit, because the world is pretty big, right? Like, and cultures are different and vast. And I'm sure there are some people that have experienced or been to every country, but I'm not even close, right, in doing that. So
the more you see, the more you realize you haven't seen, and the more you want to see. So like the bucket list just keeps getting bigger, and the possibilities are endless. There's something I wanted to ask you, since the very first part of your personal story that you told, that was just I couldn't help but think. So the town that you went to, you moved from India to the town in Illinois.
Oh, so in Illinois, from India to Illinois, the town was called Urbana-Champaign. It's basically University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
Right. Okay. So I've always known that town just as Champaign. I didn't know that there was the Urbana part. And it was cracking me up because, have you ever seen the movie Coming to America with Eddie Murphy?
Yes, long back. Yeah. Growing up, that was a classic.
Yeah. He's like the short version is he's like a king or prince in Africa, and he's like, I want to go to America and find my wife, and he picks Queens, New York, because he thinks like, oh, Queens, like that's where I'll go find my queen. And Queens at that time especially was like super, super rough, and they do a whole parody on that. And so I'm picturing you as well, like coming from India. You're like, all right, this place must be like magical. And it's like the Midwest, and it smells like fertilizer. Like, all right, awesome.
I mean, it was definitely a calibration, no doubt, right? The first few weeks, especially, it was quite a shock and a calibration working through that, both in terms of the smell, as well as just like figuring out how I'm gonna, like, I remember the day before school started. So I got there, maybe I got there like 4 or 5 days before the semester started. And the day before the semester started, I was like going around looking for jobs, because my parents, I'm very thankful, they supported my education. But my dad was pretty clear, like, you are taking some loans for yourself, so that when you graduate, you realize like you have something to kind of pay back, even though he could have probably afforded it, but he made us take loans, which I think in hindsight fueled me to get a job. And it was a good idea that I may implement on my kids one day too. But in addition to that, it was like, you have your dorm, you have your meal plans. If you want to go party, like, make your own money, right? If you want to go drinking. So I essentially ended up looking for jobs so that I could make that money just to go out to the bars. And I found a job at the newspaper library, out of all places. It was 6 or 7 floors underground, tucked away in the back, but it had newspapers from around the world. Right. And I didn't pick this job because of the globalized nature of it. I just wanted money to like make sure I could like go out drinking on Friday and Saturday. I ended up working there for 4 or 5 years, and it was fascinating because people would come to do research and they would want a newspaper from some country from the 1930s, and I would go pull out the microfilm and load it on this machine so that they could do their research. So anyways, I don't know, that all to say, in addition to calibrating to where I was in the Midwest, like, working that job was also like quite eye-opening, being 7 floors under and just, being tucked away. So there was a lot of things, like all of us when we experience a new culture. But yeah, there's a little bit of what you said.
I mean, when I think through that, sometimes I grew up in the US, and I feel like we sort of grow up with like a mentality that people who have come there from another country are like very thankful to be there. It's been like a dream, like the stereotypical thing that you might have, like, I grew up in the Southeast, so we had a lot of people coming from Latin America, and it would be very regular in my classroom in elementary school for a new student to have arrived and be like, yeah, my family just got here. I don't speak any English. We're from, Guatemala, and like, here I am. And as you would get to know those people, like, I can recall sitting at the lunchroom table at, in fourth grade, and like talking to classmates who were in that situation, and they would say things like, yeah, this has been our dream to come here or whatever. So I think we grow up with a little bit of that in our heads. But as I've gotten older and I've met, I've sat in immigration offices around the world as myself, being an immigrant living in other places. And I've done that kind of thing in the US as well. And I've met people who, that's not necessarily the case. They're kind of like, yeah, I'm here because I needed to, because I came, the country that I'm in was in a really bad place. I would prefer to be back in my home country, but I can't be there. Or, yeah, this is basically just like moving here for a job, or, whatever the case may be. It's not always as dreamy as we may have grown up thinking it is. Often it could be. I'm not saying it never is, but it's a realization that I've had like later in life. And so anyway, like, I'm, when I meet someone like yourself that actually you made that transition, like you left high school, you're going to college, you're going to the US to do that. Like, was that a long time dream? Was that a part of the plan the whole time? And like, did it live up to the dream? If it was, I guess, is part of the question.
So I'll answer that in few parts. I think the first part was it was always part of the plan. So my parents, my mom obviously lived in India when I grew up with my dad, but all her siblings, she had four other siblings, had left India already. So three were in the US and one has settled down in France, in Paris, right? My mom stayed back because her mom was there and she wanted to be close to her mom. But they were always, well, while we were growing up, they were like, we're going to send you to the US for college. That's what we can afford. That's what we can do with the right kind of scholarships and loans. But after that, you got to figure out your life. So I knew growing up that I was going to come here for college. Like a lot of my friends kind of were in that bucket. So in that regards, I was privileged in some ways, thankful, recognized that. And that was part of the plan. So even going to boarding school was like, okay, it's part of like leaving eventually. So you can leave, test the waters out now kind of thing. So in that regards, it was part of the plan. The second part on did it play out for, in terms of the dream coming true? I would say yes. If I say it today, yes, but it was a long journey, right? Like I didn't, at one point when I left Deloitte and Aon, I was like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I started some of my own companies. I was exploring moving back. I was trying to figure out what it was. So it's a long journey. I would say 20 years into my career, after Airbnb was the best, a great experience for my life, in terms of experience, but also we went through IPO. There was things that I was able to move. I wanted to move to the Bay Area and San Francisco for a long time, and I moved 6 years ago. And now I feel like I'm in a place that I really like, built the right social network. But I travel to Europe like 3-4 times a year because I have a lot of just friends and work and community there. So I would say, has it played out today? I would say yes. I have a son that's almost 3 years old. Life's good. We like where we are, and I would say so yes, it was part of the plan. Yes, it's played out. But also, to your point, I've had a lot of close friends after college that went back home to their home countries and are doing awesome too, right? Like a lot of economies have come a long way in the last 20 years. So there's no right answer, but for me, it's played out. Partly, I would say luck, and partly is my hustle to just go and do what I really want to do and see, if that gives me kind of the joy I wanted. So I would say it's a little bit of that, yeah. So I would say yes, it was part of the plan, and yes, it kind of worked out. And I think the profound tangential piece to that is, as with, or everyone knows, in the pandemic, with remote work really coming mainstream, for lack of better words, and programs like Airbnb and others like we're all working through, it really made me decide, do I want to stay in San Francisco, or do I want to move to Chicago, or do I want to move somewhere else, right? Because the choice all of a sudden was on us versus the employer in these situations where the employers are remote, advocates. So for me, the reason I say, or the reason I'm unpacking why I said, yes, I'm happy now, and why I feel like, yes, that dream came true is I'm really happy where I am. But that was an own personal journey. Me and my wife had to sit and say, like, life could be very different in Chicago or somewhere else. But we want to stay here because we love XYZ about it, be it the environment, the people. So, like, I feel like I'm really happy because I am obviously staying in the probably one of the most expensive areas of the world. So that makes it harder to afford, as much things as I could in Chicago, for example. But I'm happy because that's my choice. Like, I'm staying, I don't know if that makes sense, but it kind of flips the whole equation. And then you can't procrastinate. Then it's not like, oh, I wish I could be back in Chicago. It's like, no, you could, but you're choosing not to. So that self realization, I don't know what you think about that, or how. I mean, you've gone to the across the pond as well, so I'm sure there's some of that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think you rise to the occasion. Like people talk about, where they choose to live and the finances of living in such a place and the challenges that might come. And if it's a very expensive place, or on the converse side, like if you're going to go to a place that, where you can live like a king for next to a fraction of what you're used to paying. And what I've found in my personal life and, talking to a lot of other digital nomad types or expats and stuff is like you often kind of recalibrate to wherever it is, like that your new normal becomes your normal very, very quickly. So like for example, like I moved from the US to Ecuador at one point, and like I made a lot less money living in Ecuador. And ultimately, like I thought, at first, like, oh, I'm going to be able to live really, really well here. But like, and I did, like, relatively speaking, of course, I was doing just fine. But like, I also, like, if you compare my income that I was making at that time between the two, I was like, okay, well, I kind of like brought myself to the standard of the place that I'm living in. That's happened wherever I've moved around the world. So I think there's like something. I've talked to so many people who have moved across the world to like do the whole geo arbitrage thing, and I think that looks really awesome on Instagram, and it does work out for people. There's plenty of stories out there, but I think there's a little bit of a shadow side where that doesn't get talked about enough, where like you do actually like regress to the mean a little bit sometimes. So it's worth pointing that out, I guess. But anyway, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think it's really cool that like you're finally, like, you're in the place now that you're meant to be. It's very far from where you started in Mumbai, India, right? But you feel at home in a very otherwise foreign place, which is cool to experience. Like I think that's pretty amazing.
Definitely. And it's, I've evolved and changed so much over the last 2 decades too, right? So when you say, when I had to think of the answer, you said, like, do I feel like the dream has come true? It has today, but like so many things have changed. Like what I dreamt of, has also changed, right? So it's definitely, and in 5 years from now, or 2 years from now, or 1 year from now, it'll be a different answer potentially too. So we live and learn and grow with ourselves as well, which is a fun part of this.
It is. It is. What when you think back through that transition phase of making the move to the US, like what was very challenging, or was there an aspect that was like particularly challenging from like a cultural standpoint for two people that love the culture stuff? I imagine there must be something that pops up in your head.
I think the biggest thing was just understanding how, let me put this in a better way. The biggest thing for me was or the most shocking thing for me to realize when I came to the US was a lot of my friends and people that I met in college, like, literally did not even have passports and had not left the country. I don't mean that in a negative way. That was the reality of the situation. So, the perspectives that I was bringing, I realized some had traveled a lot, so it's not everyone, but I just assumed that, I was coming to America, everyone's traveled, everyone, they didn't even have, they didn't have a passport because they never needed one. They never left the country, right? So that was a quite an eye opener for me to realize, because, obviously I got the questions too, like, do you guys have cars in India? Do you guys have computers in India? And then when I unpacked it in the very typical way I do it, is like, they were not doing it to be, I mean, maybe some were, but they were not just doing it to be condescending. They actually had no idea if it was. So that was kind of, when you come to the US, you think because the US is the leading consumer, and obviously like a dream spot to be at, if you're coming from a country like India at that point, you just assume it's all roses and everyone has the experiences that you would dream of. But that was an interesting reality on just the culture, especially maybe more in the Midwest and the coast, where they're not left. But that was eye opening in some ways, and helped me right away like realize I cannot assume stuff. I gotta unpack like where people are coming from, and that's the cultural curiosity that we love till today, is in what we do.
It cracks me up because like I love, so one of my favorite things is when like stereotypes are true, and like they're just like really really true. And so some people have this, like I've been living in Europe for 6 years now, and I heard a zillion times like, oh, Americans don't have passports, or like you guys never even leave your country, or you don't speak other languages, whatever, all the stereotypes, like, and like sometimes they're true, and it's funny, but it's really funny when they're like true to the extreme. And like I know a person that back in the US who, I lived in Spain for over 4 years, and like throughout that period he could never quite grasp that Spain wasn't Mexico. Like in his mind it's like they speak Spanish, and so he would say things like, oh, I bet you have like really good like tacos and stuff, and I'd be like, no, it's not, like it's more like tapas. Like, oh, is that like small tacos? Like, no, like tacos are more like a Mexican thing. Spain's like patatas bravas. And then or just things like, sombreros and mariachi bands, like those prototypical things that, we think of when you think of like Mexican culture. And like every couple years, every year or so, I'd see this person on back, and like, it would just be like, yeah, no, it's like just, next to France and Portugal. And like, anyway, it's just really funny.
I think on that note, one thought you reminded me of was I would shuttle between Madrid and Mexico City for a bit at one point in my career. And, I was learning Spanish in Mexico, and I was getting pretty fluent in Spanglish presentations. And that included the slangs that people would use, not the swear words, but just general slangs that people would use. And then I would go to Spain and try to use those same slangs, and they were completely different, right? Like even within a culture, I mean, you look at India too, like, there's like 30 plus languages and dialects just within one country. So
It's wild.
it's very eye opening. It reminded me of just when I would go from Mexico to Spain, and I would use those Spanish slangs, and no one would understand it in Spain. And then Spain had their own, I think, Vale or whatever it was at that time. When you shuttle between two Spanish speaking countries, like any culture, it's definitely eye opening. And then you extrapolate that to what you just said. I could totally see that.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. In Spain, they say vale, like it sounds like B, but it's, with a V. So vale is like, okay. And I had a friend visiting me. He may be listening to this. He was living in Panama for many years, and his American friend living in Panama came to visit in Spain. And in Panama, they say dale for the same thing. And it was so funny because he just, he's fluent in Spanish, but like he would be talking to people and saying stuff in Spanish, like we're ordering food. And it's clear that like the waiter just didn't understand what he's saying. And he's like, oh yeah, dale. And they're like, do you mean vale? I don't understand. What's this word? And many others, throughout the conversation. It is wild.
You go to Mexico and say that, they won't know what you're saying either. So it was fun. Even, just as I thought I was figuring out Spanglish and I was getting good at it, I would go to Madrid and they would be like, we don't know it. What are you talking about? So it was definitely a fun experience for sure.
Living abroad, traveling abroad, and trying to speak languages abroad will definitely humble you. And there's a lot of fun in that. It can suck sometimes too, but a lot of times it's just fun. It's part of the adventure, and it's very cool to see. I think like if someone goes to your LinkedIn profile and reads all the stuff you've done, they might think that like, you just like, you're a workaholic, that like this is your life. And it's so cool to hear this side of your life, and to see how much this kind of thing lights you up. We have like a ton more in common, a lot of similarities throughout your story that I would love to get into, but I know I also have to let you get back to the real world. So we might have to save some of it for a part two. But yeah, I just want to say, like, first of all, thank you for sharing everything today. It's super fun getting to know you a little better. I look forward to seeing you in Lisbon pretty soon after this releases.
Thanks for having me. I know it's been long overdue with the scheduling stuff, but thanks for having me. And, in typical remote fashion, excited to actually meet you in person as well. So have a drink and strengthen those relationships.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I know you have some interesting stuff going on right now that I wanted to get to, but again, we just ran a little bit out of time here. So I want to real quick just give you a chance. to mention any links where people can go follow along, learn more about some of the work you're doing. And if there's any like particular initiatives you're working on that might be interesting for the audience, please mention those as well. We'll place these links in the show notes for anyone that wants to connect and learn more.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So the best way to reach out to me is either on LinkedIn or on my website, which is www.hamirani, my last name.com. And then out there, you'll see all the stuff I'm working on. One initiative that I would like to plug that I've been working on for the past few months is community, in the spirit of globalization and community that we've spoken about, is a global community of HR leaders who either want to learn more about AI or are already deep into AI. It's across the spectrum. The community is called People GPT, and the website is called thepeoplegpt.com. Go out there, check out. We'd love to kind of join in on the conversation, but that's the best way to find me as well.
I love it. In the spirit of that, and something we talked a lot about today is like global community. I was taking a look. I mean, I think you've already got like 500, 600, 700 of people from all around the world. Like this isn't a concentrated in the Bay Area kind of thing.
I was going to say, we ran some stats last week. It was like 64% US, 25% Europe, and then Asia. And we're actually going to be doing a social for our community in London at the end of April as well, because we're doing one in the Bay Area today, and then we're going to do London. So it's quickly, I think when you reflect back on your life and where all you met people, like when you start a community like that, I had no idea it was going to be more than like 30, 40 people when I put a LinkedIn post and said, let's get together. It's definitely, it's part of who you are and who you met, and it's pretty global, pretty quick.
Yeah. The I think back to the book, The World is Flat, and like that was written couple decades ago now. And like, it's just like keeps getting flatter, I feel like. So yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, everybody, if you're listening and that sounds interesting or you want to connect, the links are in the show notes. So feel free to do that. And Q, I want to say it again, man. Thank you so much. Great to finally connect for this, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Likewise. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.